There are a few places you can go in the Illustrator workspace to play around with color. So let's start by looking at the bottom of the toolbar where you have your stroke and fill color. You've seen in a previous lesson that you can double-click on the stroke or the fill to open up the color picker dialog box. I didn't show you everything you can do in this dialog box yet, and that's what we're going to do now. When you want to modify the color of an object, and let's just go ahead and select this gray object first, and then look at the color picker. You can slide your sliders up and down this hue spectrum, and when you have the general color that you'd like to change it to, then you can click anywhere inside this box. The previous color is on the bottom, the selected color is on the top, and if you want to select a fully saturated color, you want to put your cursor right at the top corner and then click and drag off. That will give you the most saturated color for whichever color is selected here on the slider. So the same would go if you wanted to select a white. Rather than just clicking at the top, you want to click and drag at the corner edge of this box and make sure that this value is FFFFFF or 100% in the brightness area. Same would go for black, not just clicking down at the bottom, but clicking and dragging all the way off the corner edge there. There would be 6 zeros. This would be the hexadecimal value or the hex number. Hex values are used for specifying color on a web page. Or you could also make sure that the brightness is set to 0. So clicking around, choosing your color, and when you have the color that you like, you can click the OK button. But before we do that, let's talk about some of the other features that you see going on here. And we'll work from top to bottom. This first box is an alert that will tell you that the selected color is what's called out of gamut. So this is your out of gamut warning. Gamut refers to a color space. So in this case, we have a CMYK document. So this would mean out of gamut for printing with CMYK inks. In other words, this particular greenish color cannot be reproduced with the inks that we have available to us today. You know, maybe in 20 or 50 years we might come up with the ability to print that color, but right now we can only see it with our eyes and view it on our monitor, but we can't recreate it in print. If you want to go to the nearest, closest possible color that could be printed, click on that alert. Illustrator will update the color to the nearest value that we can print. Now you'll notice there was a pretty big shift there from green to blue. So you might want to just click around closer to where you were before until you can find a color like this that doesn't have the alert. This second alert is for web safe colors. Now there's something that used to be called the web safe palette, and that was 256 colors that you could see on an old 8-bit monitor. And to make matters more confusing, the difference between those 256 colors that you could see on a PC were different from what you could see on a Mac. So the colors in common, because the different computers would sort of have these different color spaces, the colors in common of those 256 that you could see uniformly on both platforms was reduced down to 216. Now those 216 colors make up the web safe palette. In the early days of the internet, you would have to have designed with the web safe palette to ensure that any visitor using any platform in any browser would have a uniform experience of your design. As things progressed with computers and the internet, that no longer became an issue. And today it's really not an issue at all unless someone makes a special request that you use the web safe palette. But just like the out of gamut alert, if you see the web safe alert and you want to choose a web safe color, you could just click on that box and Illustrator will take you to the closest nearest web safe equivalent. You could also click this little box right here to only show web colors. And as you scroll through this slider here, you can see the 216 colors that make up the web safe palette. To toggle back to millions of colors, just deselect that box. Now below all this stuff are several radio buttons that will determine how this color area will be viewed. The default is set to hue, and I actually prefer choosing my colors with this layout best, but you could also change the layout to saturation, and then the slider will just show you full saturation to no saturation of the selected hue. You could also choose brightness, so that goes from full saturation to absence of color, black. Or you can choose the R or the G or the B, which stands for red, green, or blue. Again, you can pull down the sliders to shift the tonality in the color selection area. But I think you'll have the best success, especially when you're new to working with Illustrator, of leaving this setting on hue. Now the numbers next to each option here represent the value for each option. So the hue is 180 degrees, while the saturation is at 100%. If I take this color off of the corner and put it over here, you'll see that the saturation is now at 66%. And then the brightness is at 79%. And the brightness is how close you are to the white versus how close you are to the dark. Then there's your RGB values. RGB values can go from 0 to 255. So each value, R, G, or B, can be anywhere within that range. And then your CMYK stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And each of these can have a value from 0 to 100. Now, if you wanted to use a black, notice as I click and drag off the corner here, and I have 0000000 for my hexadecimal value, my RGB values are set to 0, and my saturation and brightness are also set to 0. Now, you might think if I am choosing black, then I should be seeing 100% in the K area for 100% black and zeros in the cyan, magenta, and yellow. But Illustrator is set up in your preferences to use a smart black. And a smart black actually contains a little bit of cyan, a little bit of magenta, and a little bit of yellow. It's also called rich black. And a rich black has deeper saturation than a true black. A true black is actually a little bit grayer and muddier than a rich black. Let me put these to 0 and this to 100 so you can see that it's kind of muddy. It's not exactly a full rich black. So whenever you're specifying a black in Illustrator, make sure you go all the way to the bottom, and Illustrator will automatically ensure that it gives you that beautiful, rich, saturated black. When you have the color selected that you want to use, you can click OK, or if you wanted to go to color swatches, you could click on the color swatches box. The color swatches are a representation with the CMYK values of all of the swatches in your swatches panel, which is currently collapsed right now. But if you scroll through this listing, you would see all of the colors that are presently in your swatches panel, along with their CMYK values. This little icon is also a representation of CMYK color. You can scroll through the list also using this slider here, and again, as with the other version, you would have your before and your after color. You can toggle between the color models and the color swatches by clicking on this button, just back and forth. As I said before, when you have the color the way you like it, click the OK button and your selected object will be recolored. Now you needn't have an object selected to change the color, but if you want to change a specific object's color, you need to select it first. There are other ways you can actually colorize your images too. So let's head on over to the color panel over in your panel dock. Here you'll see a miniature version of the fill and the stroke. You can click on either one of them to make them active. As a matter of fact, there's keyboard shortcuts that you might want to write down. The X key, and I'm just going to click it on my keyboard here, the X key toggles to make the stroke or the fill active. So that's an easy one to remember. If you need to change the stroke of a selected object, just select it and then click the X key. Or if you need the fill, just click the X key again. Now the other keyboard shortcut is X plus the Shift key. Shift X, like so, actually flips the color between the stroke and fill. So now I have a pink fill and Shift X gives me a pink stroke. Let's select the fill now and talk about working with color. Inside the color panel, you have access to some sliders as well as this whole rainbow. You can click anywhere within the spectrum to make a color selection. So because my fill is active, I can click anywhere to make a selection. Once that fill has color in it, my CMYK sliders come alive. I can toggle the color within any of the sliders at any time to modify the selected color, or the active color in this case. It's the fill. So we can make it darker, make it lighter, or even plug in any values here if we happen to know the CMYK value of a color. You could also switch quickly to black or to white or to none, and you can change your color as often as you like. Now it's showing CMYK values here, but you could also switch between CMYK and RGB, HSB for hue, saturation, brightness, grayscale, a web-safe RGB. You can invert the selected color. So whatever it was, you'll get the inverse, and sometimes that's good when you're trying to come up with some color models for projects. You could also show the complement of the selected color. If you toggle to one of these other color modes, the sliders will change. You should probably not work in RGB when you're in a CMYK document, or work in CMYK when you're in an RGB document. However, sometimes you might work with a customer who says, I know the RGB values, but I don't know the CMYK values. You could then plug those values in and then switch back to CMYK, and you'd still be working with the same rough color, but you'll be working with the CMYK values. Another place that you can access color is up at the top of the screen on the control bar. You can select an object and modify its properties here. And notice that the swatches panel comes open. This is an exact replica of the swatches which are seen over on the side down here. So with the object selected, clicking downward, and you can choose any of the colors here. And when I select a color up here, that same color is selected here in the swatches panel. It's two views of the same location. Another way that you can select color from an object is to use your eyedropper tool, which is down here. The eyedropper can pick up color and hereby change the fill color here. And you can click on as many different objects as you like. Now notice when I clicked here on this darker blue, what we're seeing is a solid color. There's a tint of it from 0 to full saturation. Whereas if I click on this yellow, I'm seeing a CMYK value. There are several different types of color that you can work with in Illustrator. Let's take a look at the swatches panel first, and then we'll talk about the different colors. If you happen to be mixing a particular color, you can add swatches to your swatches panel at any time. So let's say I decide I want a very particular yellow, something with kind of a golden honey mustard color to it, and that color is not part of my swatches. I can add that mixed color to my swatches panel at any time by clicking on this button right here, New Swatch. When I click on the new swatch dialog box comes open and displays the CMYK values for that color. I can keep that as the name of my swatch, or I can call it whatever I want. And then I can choose the type of color that it is. There's process color and spot color. Process color is a CMY color that can be either a spot color or a global color. And I know this might be a little confusing, but just pay attention. I think I can make you understand. So process colors are CMYK colors, and we're typically working in CMYK when we're working in Illustrator because we're usually working for print. And it can be spot or global. Now, global is not on by default for process colors. So if we leave it off, if we mix a color and then change it later, the original object would stay the way it is, and any new object would take on the changed attributes. If we do say that we want it to be global, then anytime we come back into that color swatch and change the values, all instances of the color being used in our document would be updated. So let's show you both ways. Color mode is set to CMYK, but you could switch it to something else if you wanted to. And then if you did want to adjust the colors before you save it, you certainly could. Clicking OK adds the swatch to your dialog box. And notice if you hover your cursor over the swatch, you'll see the name that you just gave it. Now this is a regular CMYK color that's not global. If we wanted to add this color again to our swatches panel, but this time make it global, let's call this mustard global, so we can tell the difference which is which, and click OK. You'll notice that the swatch itself has a little white triangle in the bottom right corner. That allows us to see from a glance that this is not just a regular CMYK process color, but an actual process color that is global. So if we create a shape and apply that color to it, that global color to it, and then create another shape and apply the regular mustard color to it, let's do a third shape with the global color. And then we want to go in and modify that global color. Double-click to reopen the swatch options, and let's say I want to make it a little bit darker in the orange-red category. Now notice as I turn on my preview that all instances of this mustard global color are updating as I click and drag. Maybe I need to make it a little bit darker or something like that. Whereas if I were to take this object and move it here, and then go in and modify the swatch like so, since it's not global, only the one selected instance will change. So you want to make sure that if you think you might ever need to change the value of a specific swatch, to make sure that it's global. Now let's say we want to save this color as a swatch. We can add this to our swatches panel by clicking on this button here, and this time we could choose a spot color. Now spot colors are always global, and a spot color is a pre-mixed color instead of processed. It's always global, but it's less expensive than using Pantone colors. In the United States, we often use colors from the Pantone color book or Pantone color family. Those are guaranteed to be consistent from print run to print run. They're also a lot more expensive than regular CMYK process or spot colors. So if you can't afford Pantone, the next best thing is spot color. If you can't afford spot color, the cheapest alternative is CMYK color. Now, with CMYK color, there is usually good accuracy. However, from print run to print run, the quality of the paper as well as the quality of the inks could change from print run to print run. So you could do a batch of business cards this year, and next year you need a new batch. And there could be a shift in color in both the paper as well as the color of the inks that you've used. Now, in some circumstances, say you're a small business, that might not matter too much, or you might even make it part of your business model to change your colors every year or every 2 years. But if you're a larger company and you really need to maintain color accuracy, you would probably want to go with a Pantone or a spot, or at the very least, a processed global color. Now, a spot color also has the white triangle in the bottom right-hand corner, but the triangle includes a dot, and the dot identifies it as a global spot color. So that's how you can tell the difference between the different swatches on your swatches panel. Notice below that there's also groups of colors with these little folder icons next to them. These little groups can be created and added and removed from your swatches panel at any time. To subtract anything from your swatches panel, you would select the group and then click on the trash icon. You could also come up here and drag and drop any of the swatches into the trash. If you wanted to delete multiple swatches, you could select a few of them together and then click the delete key. Anything within the selection will be deleted at the same time. If you wanted to create a new group from selected swatches, select them all and then click on the group button at the bottom. You can give your color group a name. You can do this for selected swatches in the swatches panel. You could also do this for selected artwork, where you can select some artwork and then create a group of colors from it. Click OK, and those will be relocated into that new folder. Illustrator comes with a bunch of free swatch libraries, which can be accessed at the bottom of the swatches panel through this button here. You can see that there's several, and you might want to go into each of these subcategories to choose specific color families. So we might want to go look at pop art. When you make a selection, you get a free floating dialog box. And as you can see, there are a lot of different options in here. And sometimes the folders are named, and sometimes it's just numbered to identify the library. If you want to use a particular color in any of these little groupings, all you have to do is click on the color to add it to your swatch. You could also add the entire grouping to your swatches panel by dragging and dropping. Additionally, you could drag and drop a color from your swatches panel onto any selected object. So that's another way of applying color to your work. You can scroll through the different libraries by clicking on the left and right arrows. This is just toggling us through that whole art history panel. To access the other libraries, you can either go back down to the bottom of the swatches panel here, or access the library options through this little button. It's the same menu of items as you saw from down here. Let's take a look at the textile swatches. Put your cursor on top. This one says it's Egyptian woven, pre-Islamic, pre-Columbian, Persian. So you're really getting detailed with the types of colors that you're using. And then if you want to use any of them, just click on the swatches and those should be added to your selected item. Another library that you may be interested in is the color book library, where you'll find several color books from around the world, as well as all of the Pantone color books that I mentioned earlier. Depending on which book you select, the numbers for your Pantone colors will change. So it's very important that you choose the correct color book, or else you may send a job off to the printer expecting blue ink and wind up with pink. The more popular color books are the solid coated and solid uncoated. So you should be sure to check with your printer beforehand to see that they have the color books for the colors that you're working on, and that they can supply those inks for your print projects. For instance, you may want to work with some metallic inks, but they may not have access to those. If you were to select one of the Pantone swatches, the library would open up and you can see that these are all spot global colors. And if you hover your cursor over any of the Pantone swatches, you'll see the name and number and any letters associated. The C in this case stands for solid coated. When you find a swatch that you like, clicking it will add that swatch to your swatches panel. So you could select 3 or 4 or 5 of them, and each click will add the selected swatch to your panel. You don't necessarily need to use them, but it's nice that they're added automatically. When you're finished with the floating panel, all you need to do is click the X, and those swatches that were added will stay in place. You can save your swatches as a library to open and use at a later date. To do that, choose Save Swatch Library. There are 2 options, Save as ASE and Save as AI. If you save it as an AI, you can reopen it at any time, and when you open up the library, it will be at the bottom under User Defined for you to open and reuse at any time on any other document. If you save the swatch library as ASE, you can actually share that file with other users, and they would be able to, like you, open that swatch into their version of Illustrator. Now, I mentioned before up in the color panel that when you have a spot color or a Pantone color, you will always see a tint slider. This tint slider is actually a nice way of saving a little bit of money, because let's select all of these and make them the same color. You could use one ink, maybe one Pantone color, but then change the tint of several objects to something a little lighter to look like you're using multiple colors, but you're really just using a tint of a single color. So you can add a lot to a particular document without having to spend too much money and still get the guarantee of a particular color that you'd like to use. In addition to the color panel, there's another panel called Color Guide. And in the Color Guide panel, you can use this to help you find color groupings that might be nice to use in your artwork. If you click on this drop-down menu, you'll see what they call harmony rules. There's complementary, complementary to, split complementary, left and right complementary, analogous, monochromatic, shades, triads. If you had ever taken any color theory, this stuff would be familiar to you. So you could choose any of these color harmony rules to apply to your artwork, and it will show you shades and tints of the selected color. There are also other options here where you could say, show me tints and shades, show me warm and cool, and show me vivid muted. And when you see a color that you like, all you need to do is select it and then apply it to your selected object. You could also drag and drop the color onto your selected object like before. In addition to working with this area here, you can also click here to go into the library and choose any of the other options. There's also this button here which opens up the Recolor Artwork dialog box. Now let me cancel out here and select this row of boxes, and we'll click that button again. This will allow you to recolor any selection based on the harmony rules that you selected. So for the old color and the new color, you can see my original colors are here along the left, and then the new colors from my harmony rules are being assigned on the right. Now if I like that, I can keep those new colors and just click OK. I can also access other color groups through this menu here and play around with the different hues and values in any of these colors. I can reorder them in any way, create and save new harmony rules. There's so much going on in this dialog box. I encourage you to spend some time looking around to see how much you can alter within your given color harmony group. When you have everything the way you like it, simply click OK. Before I show you that, however, I want to show you that there's two buttons up at the top here. There's Assign and Edit. If we click on the Edit button, you get this really cool graphic that's interactive. You can click and drag on these little circles and slide them in and out. And as you do, notice that the color harmonies for the active colors is changing. And as I'm clicking and dragging, it's recoloring my artwork selected on the artboard behind. So this is a really awesome way of working to find colors that are harmonious within a particular color range. So if you happen to know you needed to work with a particular blue value, you could find colors that are harmonious to work with it. Again, when you're ready to save the color changes, click the OK button and those changes will become permanent. You can add this color harmony rule set to your swatches panel by clicking this button here. The last thing that I'd like to show you about working with color is an extension that comes free with Adobe Illustrator, and it's accessible through the Window Extensions menu. It's a tool Adobe has called Color with a K and a U, and it opens up its own dialog box. Many of these color harmony sets have been created by other Adobe users and shared with you to use in any way that you see fit. They're usually listed by the highest rated, though you can change the view here to most popular, newest, random, saved, or custom. And then you could also choose all time or limit the search to the last 7 days or the last month. You could even create your own color harmony rules and upload them to the color community to share with everyone else. Now, if you're looking for a particular color or theme or something, you can plug in your own search terms and then see things that match that. So for instance, if you wanted to look for colors like the ocean, you could just type in the word ocean, hit enter or return on your keyboard, and then a bunch of color swatches would come up. You could then use those at any time, and if you wanted to add the selected theme to your swatches panel, just click on that button and boom, there they are. This is a free floating panel that can be opened and closed at any time through that window menu. So that's working with color.